me. Thank you. So we're on strategizing, Kate, and welcome to the group. Thank you. So we spoke about complex thinking systemically and trying to dig down underneath for deeper meanings, making links or interpretations that are unusual. Any other comments on that?
Julia, my experience was a little different in that any comfort I have at the strategizing level dissipated pretty rapidly this last week. And I found myself collapsing 2-3 levels down the spiral really quickly into fear, anxiety, which are not classic of strategizing level. It's not that I don't feel them when I'm in that space, but I feel them very much more intensely when I come right down to specializing and finding certainty. And so I realized the mercuriality of this experience.
Yeah.
That having reached and having visited and having played in a particular forest doesn't mean you're resident in that forest.
That's beautiful, Wayne. Thank you. And I want to just add another strange interpretation, which it's absolutely the center of gravity. And I am wondering, I've been sort of looking at the transition into transformer or transforming. And I don't know what happened to you, but sometimes I can see that people move from this massive complexity and they move upwards rather than downwards into one simple emotion. And I sometimes think that's indicative of a shift from strategizing to transforming, but it could be very well exactly as you describe, a shift, a fallback kind of approach on account of the drama and tragedy of last week. Maybe.
How would you know the difference?
You see, this is what I'm trying to figure out, but I think it's a fed upness with trying to interpret. And maybe we can get Daniel and Roland to comment on that just a little bit as well. I think that at some point, strategizing, people get fed up with the complexity of sense making and go basically something along the lines of, fuck it, I'm going with feelings. To put it bluntly, sorry. Does that make sense, Daniel? You understand that? Okay. Will you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as you put it, Julia. I can very clearly remember getting to a point where it's like, fuck this, yeah. There's no point in trying to understand this complexity. And I guess with that, it also what disappears is all sorts of things that are relative. To look at things as being relative is to be just a stuck. So you just let go of it all.
So it's you almost like lose that love of cognitive complexity as a source of safety and security, and you just give up trying to have safety and security. Is it a bit like that?
Yeah, but that doesn't come though.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, but there isn't safety and security, it's worse.
That's right. So that's why I'm wondering.
Much worse.
Yeah, and fear and uselessness and helplessness and all those lovely feelings which come in at that level. Thank you. But just a thought, just another thing to throw into the pot regarding your comment, Wayne. Ooh, I hear the big rain coming in now. So hopefully my little tin afdak won't drown out this conversation. Who else would like to make a comment?
Julia,
Yeah, and then Nicola. Yeah, Rick.
just the evil stuff again. We talked a bit about that. Hitler comes up every time in this conversation, but who else do we? How do we know strategizing people tend to be eviler?
Yeah, I think that the issue is not really that they're eviler, it's just that they're actually more potent.
Okay, that was one point we discussed.
Yeah, in the world of making things happen, strategizing is the most potent, the most systemic, the most strategic, the most confident. So in that world, if one of them were to take on an evil disguise, they would be able to do the most damage, perhaps. I think the word evil is a difficult word, and in our conversations in Dan and I, it was really provocative, and people got very, very upset with that word. Because what is evil? And I mean, there's so many different belief systems about what constitutes evil. Is it good turned inside out? Is it good but viewed over the wrong time span? I mean, all these different wonderful and strange post-conventional ideas about what evil will be.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some basic stuff like it's probably good not to murder or rape or be racist. You know, there are a couple of things that it's quite good to avoid. But I think the thing with the strategist is this sense of power. Okay, I can. So for what, you know, coming out of that miserable time in internalizing, sorry, I've got a creaky chair, where you feel a bit incompetent and a bit stupid, and you're identifying with minority power groupings a lot more. You come into this potent position where you finally get a chance to take from the world what you want. And who knows what you want? And I think it's that's the capacity for evil potentially. And we know that it's unequal development as well. So we might have great cognitive powers and great capacity for agency and making things happen, but we might be really lesser developed in some areas, you know, like the guru that sleeps with his followers, or the, So unequal development provides opportunities for evil to be enacted, perhaps. These are all speculations.
Do we have examples of that or statistics of that, or is it more a sense that it tends to happen?
It's more of a sense, and we discussed it at Jen, and it's not, some people absolutely say it's true, and some people say it's not true. My sense is this, and I'm pretty hardline, but why should you be suddenly cleansed of all your socialized behavior patterns suddenly at this level? So this model isn't a level of like enlightenment where suddenly you're purified and you're away from your hideous childhood pain. This model is not that kind of model of redemption. This model for me is more a model of becoming less and less controlled by my childhood socialization, but still feeling the pain and the hurt and replicating the patterns from my childhood, but seeing them more fully. That I've seen in strategizing people, capacity to see each other's patterns, call them, and do the same on oneself, but not necessarily to change them.
Good, thanks.
I don't know. Sorry. We're in post-con. I've got no categorical answers. What else is going on in your minds?
Julie, I too struggle with the idea that this is the more has more propensity for either evil or good, but I accept it has more propensity to be influential. And it's like a bigger stick, and that stick cuts both sides. So that's, to that extent, I could understand evil being one side, but its potential, its potential to be positively influential is equally high.
Yeah. I think this is a huge conversation, and it often rests on what the definition of evil is, and our idea of whether we are evil or not. And I think, we did a really interesting thing on the weekend for the International Enneagram Conference, Simon Lucille and I, and we looked at patterns of racism per Enneagram numbers with all our data. And we found some really interesting material from the adult development world. And there are patterns in Enneagram numbers, but they're related to openness or conformity. So the more open you are, the less kind of prejudicial you tend to be, and the more normative, the more conformist you are, then the more you might be less open to outside groups. But if you look at maybe we can apply the learning to this idea around evil. So if we use the maturity, the picture created by the maturity framework of strategizing level, and then we look within the Enneagram numbers for personality qualities that might flip the personality towards evil or against evil, then maybe that's a way of working with it, like as a two-part model. Like, for example, I'm Enneagram 8. So a lot of the evil I perpetrate in the world is due to incredible anger and clumsiness and misinterpretation. So those are, but it's still evil what I do, potentially. Oh, Lordy, help me with this. Help me develop this idea that actually that we all have capacity for evil, but some of us accept it more than others. And our orientation towards evil is determined by our personality, and the way we can see that is through looking at our Enneagram. Is that a bit mad?
That sounds very possible. And then if certain maturity levels tend to correlate with certain Enneagram types to some extent, then there would be some of that filtering through, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Because the same openness is required to mature faster than other people as to be more open to other groups. It's that openness that supports. So basically the data showed that 947? No. Do you want to know? Shall I quickly look? Sorry, I should know this offhand. But let me just check on it quickly before I give you the wrong data. Actually, Are we going off topic, or do you want to see it? You want to see it? There you go. Can you see that? 754. Okay, I'm going to just stop you. I'm happy to share this presentation with everybody here. You're welcome to have a look at the statistical analysis around that. I feel like I just went off topic. I just floated off in the wrong direction, and it was unhelpful. So I want to come back, and I want somebody else to steer me and the group in a more constructive way. Nicola, thank you.
I'm not offering to steer the group in a constructive way. I just want to ask a question. One of the things we were talking about was the transitions from internalizing into strategizing, and then the transition from strategizing to transforming, and wondering how people experience themselves changing, particularly in the absence of maybe knowing a framework like this. What was their lived experience of capacities or ways of thinking, if they can think back on that transition from internalizing, and what helped?
Yeah, you'd like to make a comment?
I think I can comment on that. I think, and Julia, please, steer me otherwise because I'm learning the system. I was in a coach training program 4 years ago and was assessed. Didn't know about. I knew kind of the general idea of adult development, but didn't have firsthand experience of assessments, and was assessed as a kind of like a blocked performer. And big ego blow for me. I thought I was going to be off the charts with all my yoga and meditation practice. And then all of a sudden I showed up, 6 months ago as a kind of almost like a full strategizer with just the first signs of tipping into transforming. And I didn't know any of this was happening. I didn't know where I was going to end up. And I really went into a big getting support, getting held to be in emotional spaces. When I look back, ended up being a big part of the move into internalizing. And I was just trying to deal with a lot of grief and, stress and challenges that just arose. And I just kept getting more and more support. And all of a sudden, just being held in, as I call it now, putting a lot of snot in the dirt and snot on the ground, just a lot of really big releases and what I'd call small T trauma healing, not big T, most likely, but small T, but in a lot of it. And I think that was a real move, and, work and focus, and seeing that like it was all harder. I was just trying to kind of get through the workday and do enough to continue to move this thing along and support myself, and do a lot of healing work and work with, partner work. So like couples therapy, circle experiences, that are healing, different types. And I think that really brought me into internalizing. And then there was, I feel, so much clearing that happened that there weren't many more tears to cry at that moment in my life. And I think that helped me. All of a sudden I kind of, I'm here now. Like, that's kind of what it feels like looking back. Like, all right, I did so much of that, and there's not much more to cry. There's just more to live and think and use a little more of these faculties. And so that, I feel, really brought me into the strategizing. And now I started to feel like a hermit crab that needed the new shell. I was in this small apartment in the city, and just in my mind, not as connected to my body and nature. And it's like, get me out of here. And now I moved into nature, and now I feel the emotion. Like, I'm crying way more again now, but for different reasons, and way more interested in nature, and just want to watch the birds, fish, and the crabs swim by, as I was telling the group. So I wonder if I'm not picking up a foot and starting to move, making a move into transforming, and I needed the space, the more of a nature connected place for that. So that's just my kind of assumptions of some of this movement.
I love that. I mean, I've heard from a lot of people that business of having no more tears to cry, or just being fed up with feeling shit. And that is sort of this kind of sense that like, I actually can't be this bad. I cannot be this bad. I can't be bad at everything. So like, obviously I'm making up a story about who I am. And if I'm making up a story, then why don't I make up a better story and not a shit one, like at internalizing? Why don't I make up a story of competence and skill and just move into that from that story? So I love that thing of no more tears to cry. This can't be my only reality. Clearly, I've constructed something. Let me make something a lot more easy to live with. And I think competence, getting feedback from the world. Wow, you pulled that off. Or knowing kind of, like magic is actually a question of learning patterns. And I think that's what strategizing people do, is they start to go, oh, patterns. So people think that, just because you know the Enneagram and you can make kind of comments about personality, you're a magician or a Sangoma. But actually, it's just pattern. Krista, you look like you recognize that.
Slow with my fingers here. I think for me, that's probably the most marked thing of the strategizing experience, if that's what it is. I mean, for me, over the past few years, and it's been up and down at times, but I felt this for me a massively increased capability to make sense. I don't always think that it translates into all areas of my life. I think sometimes some of the areas are almost like a little bit cut off. But that thing of quickly seeing patterns across disciplines, across fields, inside. So it's like a much more rarefied intellectual space. And for me, it's also been living in sort of that kind of intellectual complexity. I seek it out. I want it. I want things to be difficult. But intellectually difficult. I like, and I mean the other side of that is that I am extremely frustrated with my material difficulties. But there's that kind of so when you say this thing, immense capacity to get stuff done or do things or be powerful in the world, I must tell you, in the past, I don't know, I mean, the past week has been particularly rough, and a month or 2 or 3 before that has been exceptionally rough, and 6 months before that has been like very, very rough. So I actually resonate a lot with what Wayne says. The one thing that does not feel for me affected by it is I do feel at the same time that there's this material world difficulty in me struggling with this. Is that my capacity to see patterns keep developing. I do have that sense. It keeps it gets overwhelmed at times.
So Krista, there's this, I mean, you're hypervigilant around patterns.
Yeah.
And I'm just nosy and full of opinions, but I'm intrigued because what I sometimes see in people at strategizing level is this brilliance around typologies, patterns, maps, integrating maps, map upon map upon map. But that is a form of kind of often, I don't know if this is your world, but like a form of stuckness, because it's this this desire to make the world fit together and make sense. And I don't know if that's possible, but like a lot of Enneagram people in this space of maps, nested in maps, and integral people nested in maps, and it's a kind of a form of stuckness.
Yeah, for me, there's always in my life around patterns. There's been two things, and it's been my whole life like that. So I don't know how it relates here. There's been two ways of that I've discovered. The one way that I find very hard, which is this sort of almost analytical way of going about things, and I do feel a capacity to do that. I very quickly, if I have to go into an analytical mode, become overwhelmed. And it's been always my life like that. And then I can do it, but I become very unhappy. But there's another mode that I sometimes find, which is a more, I like to think of it as a poetic mode, which is like an instantaneous snap kind of a there's the pattern. And it keeps doing that all the time. It's that sort of, so there's two different kinds of pattern making here, I feel. The one is digging and the other one is sort of like flushing.
Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating because you've got a meta story of meta stories going on.
Freaking insane.
Beautiful. It just needs to make money. Yeah, my orientation is there as well, is to play in the patterns endlessly, round and round. And then I need Simon to come in and say, go forth and sell work, make people pay.
Mm.
Yeah. What else about strategizing? How about so a lot of the comments I made are quite general. Krista's saying actually at this stage he's feeling shit. He doesn't know if it's fall forward or fall back, but it's not feeling so good. How did the other strategizing people feel? Maybe the later stage guys want to remember how they felt at this stage.
I feel goodish. I struggle though. If I'm trying to think, a number of times I've tried this exercise after I learned about after I encountered Aephoria and the frameworks, trying to figure out where those transitions were, but I really struggle with that. To me, it feels like a very gradual process. And I'm not really aware of threshold effects. So in that respect, it's tricky. I've lost track of what I wanted to say. There was a point I was trying to make. Well, one point is I know I'm not aware of thresholds. That's maybe all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because it shows how generalized my commentary is, and a lot of the commentary is in the world. And Rikus, I'd love to ask you a question. Do you remember a time where you kind of lost like confidence in yourself and you questioned where you came from and the ethics?
So that I think so that transforming stage. So I came. It's sort of easier to bind it to big transitions in life, and I don't know to what extent it relates, but I know I came to Cape Town about 20 years ago. So that's a significant step. I mean, my environment changed entirely. I came in without really knowing anybody, had to find a new place, and I was working for myself at the time, doing freelance work. I had to find work here, new clients. So there was a lot of transition there. And for several years after that, life was very tough. And you know, but there was reason for it to be tough, because I was dealing with a difficult transition. But at the same time, there was definitely that sense that you know, life is difficult, and especially compared with many of my peers who just from university slipped into some corporate job, and you know, they just sailed along that very definite track, where it felt like I was more trying to find my own way, in my own way. And I think that went on for many years. And in some ways, you know, the material environment got better. But yeah, there was definitely a sense, especially I know for a very long time, it felt like I was preparing. There was a realization at some point, probably I think in my mid-30s, a very definite insight one day that it feels to me like I've been preparing my whole life, and I'm not sure for what. You know, when does life start? What makes the difference? So that felt a bit. That was a bit of a threshold. Then there was a conscious decision. Well, I'm done preparing now. This is life, so I better make it the way I want it to be. But that was probably, yeah, I don't know if that, the other significant, Todd said a lot about experiences with circles and therapeutic frameworks, for lack of a better word. So I
think
environments, contexts. I did a lot of somatic physical stuff. I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible at sports. I did, in my 20s, I discovered Tai Chi, which was the first time I really enjoyed movement. And from Tai Chi yoga, and in Cape Town dancing, I did a lot of dancing, conscious dance stuff for many years, several times a week, all the time. And related to that, Tantra also, I was involved in the local Tantra community for about 10 years, which is also a very physical environment. And I think there was a real sense that those things made differences, very gradually, very slowly. And some of it felt more like going to the gym, in the sense that as long as I did it, it had an effect. But if I stopped, it didn't transform me. It was a practice that made me better while I was doing it. But I think gradually, over a period of maybe 10 years, there was some residual effect, some transformative effect that did seem to last.
That is interesting, you know, like what are the different processes that support development? There's the somatic story. There's a story about entheogens that give you, you know, psychotropic drugs that might give you different perspectives. There's been a bit written on that. And then there's the therapy and the spirituality kind of trends as well. And I'm curious, as a therapist, how many people have done more than 5 years of therapy? Okay, so therapy is not such a big thing for this group. Interesting. Daniel.
I studied group psychotherapy.
Okay.
So I did the group analysis stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
But that was 3 years. So,
yeah.
So not all of us have done 5 years or that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's really interesting because I think it's one of the definite routes that people take, but it's not the only route. So, and then we've got the spiritual route. So
if I can just say this, Julia, I sometimes think the therapy in that has perhaps got more impact at the earlier stages of development.
Right. Nice. Say a little bit more.
I think the level we're busy speaking with now and beyond will be much more internal triggers that's going to create growth. And the external context or what somebody can provide is going to become almost irrelevant. But that's my thinking. But
I love that. And it, yeah.
But at earlier stages, if you struggle, you know, with your performance drivenness or whatever, you know, and your relationships are breaking down, therapy and all of those things are wonderful processes to help you cope and be more effective where you are. And maybe, you know, even building the scaffoldings for the next levels. But once you've gone out of that space, then you realize that you're on your own. Well, I feel I'm on my own.
Yeah, I think you are on your own. I think maybe there's also a thing like maybe like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like formulaic and very specializing, you know, that might just be inappropriate for late stage. And then the psychodynamic stuff, depending on how that was worked with, and the Jungian stuff and the existential stuff, if we just want like 4 schools. I mean, my sense is existential with its focus on death, anxiety, and all this, and individualism and loneliness and isolation might be more of a post-con kind of thing. But it also reminded me that I have a therapist and she is psychodynamic, and she keeps trying to make me lie on the couch and I keep saying bugger off. And but what she does for me is keeps me normal when I'm too floaty, because I can easily float off, and then someone has to say, Julia, this is how you need to behave in these situations, or, you know, like this would be a reasonable response.
Julia,
what do you mean by floaty? Sorry.
Just I don't really so it's like I'm not I don't have some things I don't have to fight for or worry about, and so I don't care, and I have to be reminded to play the game, just, you know, because it's useful to me and it's useful to people around me, and so that's what that, and also help noticing. So I tend to notice very acutely my own fallibility and forget what else is going on in the system. And so therapists help me with that. And I miss my own problems. I'm very well supervised. I have a coach and a therapist. And my coach is off this planet, but my therapist is very grounded.
Julia, can I pick up from there? I think this thing about, for me, what really rings true is this: you're on your own. That really resonates so strongly with me, and it's tough, but there's a deep realization that there is no one else that can do it for you. So that makes it calls on many things. If you're going to be on your own, you are in relationship, but actually in life, it comes at a much deeper level. That survival is actually completely and 100% up to you. Forget everything else. It's not going to happen. You're in this thing on your own. So that's the one thing. But when you talk about passages of time, it's quite interesting that we now, through Aephoria and becoming more familiar with this framework, how we would go into an organization and try and sort of tickle their fancy with the next level, and try and entice them to want to grow and mature into the next level. But actually, what are we doing? I'm not sure that we really can. We probably can, at a cognitive intellectual level, we can explain what that might be and what it might look like and whatever. But coming back to the thing of the passage, if I look back, I think that actually life does it. It's how you are in life. And sometimes it may come with some hunger. It may be what we do in organizations and with individuals actually does create a hunger, but I cannot say for me. I didn't know about this framework anyway, so I couldn't have had a hunger for what I didn't know. For me, it was life's events that just chuck you in the bloody deep end, and you get through it. You have to find a way to get through it, and you learn. And you feel your way through it in that dark abyss of trying to find your way through it.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit torn between the hungering for the next level. So how do I, yes, I want to see more into transforming. I want to see more of that in me, but is that going to bring it on, or is there something that's going to be the triggers and the, something really great, something really awful, something really hard? I don't know, but in my experience, it's been a bit of a life experience, and recognizing that the frameworks that might have operated one time don't actually cut it anymore. You got to work your own frameworks out.
Yeah.
You got to do some sort of sense making that's completely different from anything you've ever operated on before, because it's not going to work. And I found for me, I discard them anyway. I don't believe in them. I don't strive for them. I don't really respect them very much. I'll create my own frameworks, and I'll live those until they don't work anymore, and then I'll have to find some new ones.
So you use frameworks?
I haven't really consciously, but I guess I have, of saying, what do I believe? What is this thing? How do I make sense of this thing? And the way I'm making sense of something now could be very different than I was.
Yeah. I find it interesting, the whole framework thing, because they're pattern people and non-pattern people, but pattern, everyone is, in the maturity model, they say the most complex pattern is language. And language actually defines our reality. So that's the patterning that kind of in this model you're working to undermine. But I don't know. I don't know what sense. I really relate to the loneliness and the.
Yes.
I'm on my own here, and I keep hoping there's going to be someone coming in that, but it's not. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I was going to follow it with loneliness. It's not aloneness, and that lovely aloneness we all enjoy, or some of us. It's in aloneness that it really just like whacks you in the face, and you have to find your way through the muck and make some sense of it.
And defending yourself, does that work? If you try and defend your perspective?
I don't care to.
I just find post-con and you make me laugh because it's just clear, straightforward, wicked post-conventional thinking. I'm not going to.
Well, you wouldn't probably agree with me or like it, or you'd probably want to fix me or tell me what it should be and how it shouldn't be like this and whatever. And it's not going to be. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
And if it makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now we have this thing like, as we mature, we become a balloon that is drifting further and further away from the earth. And it's strategizing. It's the last kind of very post-con moment where we're still connected to the earth, where we can still very easily work with some of the earth stuff, like the models and the frameworks and the specializing mindsets. One of the things I'm interested in is how we bridge our hugely idiosyncratic internal worlds into a more organized space. And how do we try and insert ideas in there? In no ideas. I mean, it's something that the transforming lot can do quite well, but they do it in a different style. Roland.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a lot of the comments that have been made recently since Rikus and Christo spoke, which both of those kind of testimonies really spoke to me. And then your comment about therapy and the language, and I'm sitting here thinking how powerful the ontological framework is for, and it also speaks to loneliness and the sort of floaty bits that you were talking about. Mm. Because I think, as you say, strategizing is the last sort of level where you are still trying to make sense of the complexity. And then there is a thing that happens where you reconnect, I think, with the simplicity of your own individualism, your own sensations, and how your sensations relate to your emotions relate to your language. And I think that cross-training for me feels like a way to move beyond strategizing. So I feel like I had this question at the beginning of this session, and just listening to everyone, this framework has come back to me. And I think this is also coming out of somatic theory at the moment, is that slowing those three domains down and looking at your own individual connection between your own, your sensations, your emotions, your language, and knowing that your balloon metaphor, the connection that you want to have back to the earth, comes from an individualized formation through your sensation. So only your formation was very personal. At some point, it gets very universal. I hope I'm making sense here. So the formation was personal. It gets very complex. The reconnection is actually very personal, but at the same time universal. I hope I'm making sense there. So that's where you can. That's why and you can see why somebody like Buddha went so individualistic in the end, I think, because because all the connection actually lies in the personal, in that sensory space. I hope I'm making sense. But what I'm basically saying is that ontological framework for me holds the ticket out of strategizing, I think. Because the work becomes very personal, and yet you're still connected in a sensory way.
So that absolutely that makes sense. We used to have a methodology called cross-training your four brains to support maturation, spiritual. We used to do things related to all those exercises. We still are meant to be doing that. I think it's in our proposals somewhere. But also just to reiterate what you're saying, we were talking about how do you relate to the world when you're in your post-con space. And so the strategists are still trying to find models and frameworks and stuff to kind of connect to the earth. And as you rightly say, Roland, it's at transforming level when we become very simple and very emotional, and we use those simple Buddha type interactions to connect to the world.
And sensory as well. I think, for me, I also see that as a sequence. Like the sensory supports the emotional, the emotion supports the linguistic. The one emerges out of the other, and then the sort of trip back is, it actually does get simple again, but then it reconnects you to everybody else who's also having their shared simple experience, shared personal simple experience. Yeah.
But in fact, that experience is so overwhelmingly emotional that you need to have quite a developed self and capacity for pain to stay there.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, because on one level, it's like all the defenses you had when you in formation, you now have to track through them again back to the pure sensory experience, and realizing that there is no content, that all the content you ever had was deeply personal, and now you're just left with the meaning. The construction is yours, help self. It's your meaning making, so
Yeah.
do with it what you like.
Yeah, I mean, because also strategizing is a much emotionally easier. Perhaps for some, not maybe for you, Krista. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But hopefully it's existential laughter with you. But
Julia, I think it's interesting that you say floaty, and then Krista is maybe having a more integrated experience, because I imagine if you are, depending on your integration along the way, you could be having a really emotional experience anyway.
Yes.
But I think you are in danger of having a very abstracted experience if that's what I imagine you mean by floaty, is that you can get caught in the linguistic bits and just, almost buy into them again, because you miss them, as you say as well. You can forget a little bit and reattach to those narratives and constructions and
yeah. Well, I think that.
And I think, sorry, one last thing, because I think you and I are probably quite similar here, is that my backtrack has been quite traumatic, because I think I spent my life kind of disconnected from those emotional and sensory spaces. So the trip back was quite, a lot more traumatic than I would have wanted. So I relate to the floaty bit, because even though it gets more complex and more weird, it actually is quite a safe space in a way.
Peaceful and safe, yeah.
Something went on for me when you speak of the sensory and emotional and linguistic, because I think that's the sort of thing that I've been reflecting on in the past few days. It feels to me at times that the linguistic is quite out of whack with the emotional and physical. It's like the one almost can't quite reach into the other. I don't know, maybe that's like a very 974 type of statement. That's the other thing I sometimes feel. It's like I go her when I speak. So, but I've been very conscious of the domain of body, of being physically in this world, and actually to a certain extent the very incredible weirdness of it.
Can you talk more about that? The weirdness of that being a physical thing in the world?
Yeah, I don't know, it's like it sometimes feels like almost unbelievable, and yet this is so undeniable. I don't know, Julia. It's like a very strange. I don't know, something about being in the body and the sense that I have at the moment is that is a sense of the body coming along and coming into its place, and yeah, I don't know, in the strange grip of death.
the passage of time on the body. Roland, were you wanting to say something?
I also relate to that, that at one level you are just sort of a biological organism in a big collection of others. And, you know, it's a bit sort of an existential nightmare on one level, but it's also, I guess it liberates you from it allows you to realize that the meaning making is merely that. So it's, yeah, it's quite, yeah, I think it's again, it's connecting to the whole, because then you are sitting in that biology as one big being. Yeah, and the language part is how you got separated in the first place. I guess that's the other way to look at it. I hope I'm making sense. But I do relate to you saying, on one level, realizing you're a biological organism is quite disturbing. It feels quite meaningless, and yet I think it is the way through to the connection, which is meaningful again. The collective connection, collective, connecting to the collective. So I guess what I'm also wondering, Julia, is from Krista's experience, whether whether the body is maybe a real ticket, whether it's a real ticket at all stages or especially at this stage.
I would imagine it's a really good ticket at all the cognitive stages. So it would be good at specializing, it would be good at performing, and good at strategizing, I think. I don't know. I like the idea of the cross-training thing. Yeah, I think like the body's always the circuit breaker for the very circular cognitive thinking. So I think
I don't know if this is the right thing to mention around the body here, but I think the body is very involved in all of these stages, and then you get to a stage where all desire disappears. The body turns around, it becomes something totally different. It is the most frightening experience you can imagine. So you can't leave the body out of this story.
Yeah. I'm really curious about, what do you mean about when, I didn't hear you properly, when the body turns against you in a way?
No, it just turns away from what you know.
Oh.
And what you expect of it, and the way it's always been.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden not like that anymore.
Yeah.
So then your whole relationship, almost through your body to everything else, changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose also all of those disorders, that start manifesting somatically, a part of that thing, like attacks and autoimmune disorders and I'm definitely in that zone. It's an interesting moment when one's body turns against one, or when it goes off to places where you don't want it to go. Yeah. Tired.
Oh, it's so helpful to hear everybody that spoke after me, especially because realizing how misleading my comments were, in that, I feel like part of what contributed to my stuckness was the way I approached talk therapy and mindfulness and yoga. I actually feel like that contributed to stuckness. And when I thought about what I actually did that had a therapeutic effect but wasn't therapy, I wrote down 7 different modalities that all had a somatic element, from very, very somatic to some somatic, and that was essential for me in moving along on this path. So it very much was not talk therapy or mindfulness as I had practiced it.
Yeah, that's great. So it is definitely a big time for body. Yeah. I kind of want to, I know, Todd, we've had these conversations before about how, so some kinds of talk therapy and coaching kind of neutralize feelings and being in the world. And you see this a lot in the OD community and in the Enneagram community, people who present a kind of a neutralized version of themselves, a processed version. Almost as a way of demonstrating their maturity and enlightenment. I know we've had this. Do you want to talk a little bit about it, Todd? What's your experience? And yeah.
I mean, I think I just did in part. I was a poster child for what you just said. I was in coach training going, all right, I'm not sure they have a chart long enough for how off the chart I'm going to be on this assessment, and with all the yoga and meditation and therapy I've done, and then was a block performer, and almost, I think first a panic attack and then just an ego energetic tail between my legs for a long period of time, and that helped to actually break me out of that. And so I very much was stuck in that unconsciously, and had to ultimately get plunged into that terrifying space, which is actually feeling things in my body, like an embodied feeling of things, which I didn't know I was missing. I thought I had emotional intelligence. Like, I actually thought I was really emotionally intelligent, and I actually was just not feeling them and thinking about and talking about what I was feeling. So it was it was very, very painful, and at times horrifying to actually have to feel or want to feel or being able to feel things in my body, and to feel safe enough or to move into that vulnerability and expressiveness. I really didn't like it for a long time when I started doing that.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of different types of things for me. Like, it was like going at it from a bunch of different somatic related angles really helped to kind of break that shell of whatever had been created or I had contributed to creating. Yeah, but thought I was pretty darn far along before that ever happened.
Thank you, Todd. That's beautiful. That's the whole spiritual bypass thing, often as well comes in now. So we think we've done our work, we've got amazing spiritual technologies, and then we have this nice neutral way of talking about our life, and it all feels good. It's quite it's hard to get in there when someone is so very successful.
Yeah, Julia, I have a personal gripe around this, because I see almost a sort of a homogeneity at some level with coaches who feel, there's a way of being that's actually more of a social construct.
Yeah. Where
you can look like a processed person, where it's around moving slowly and being mindful and
mindfulness. Exactly that. I hate that.
Yeah. And then you get someone like Desmond Tutu or the Dalai Lama, who they just behave like silly kids sometimes, and I think that's quite refreshing. I actually personally feel quite ashamed for my own enthusiasm sometimes in these settings. Like, I'm not supposed to be enthusiastic, because I'm supposed to have transcendent enthusiasm by now.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think the thing is you want to make the smorgasbord bigger in terms of feelings. You want access to more intensity across the range, not this blandness. But it is an interesting thing in terms of marking the assessments. Let me tell you, it can get complicated because we then land up having conversations about, is this kind of spiritual bypass? Is this OD talk or is this real work? So something to remember when working at high levels to try and figure out what actually is going on. And when people are feeling like they've done their stuff, it's really hard to insert the idea that they haven't. And they're clever as well, because not stupid people don't tend, that's one of the other factors is you've got to be clever to get this far down the road.
Julia, there's just one comment I want to make explicit. I think it's implicit in a lot of what everybody has said, and you explicitly mentioned briefly capacity to handle pain.
Mm.
And for me, that seems a very, very significant aspect. It's something that's a part of me that I was very aware that it developed and how it developed over time.
Mm.
And I do think that is vital.
Mm. I love this discussion. I've got two sort of things I love to talk about here and that I'm trying to work on in my life is like when I'm in extreme pain, I would like to be able to look after someone else. So just because I'm in pain doesn't mean I have to create pain in someone else's life. I think that sort of behavior is early level. So people can't hold pain and they immediately kind of throw it out at someone else who passes by. And that's generally me. And it's bank managers, car guards, those sorts of people that I throw my pain onto. But I'm trying to hold pain so that I can care for someone at the same time as being in pain. And people often at conventional levels think that this is impossible and it's a paradox and you can't do both. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. Can you be in enormous pain and still care and love someone else? Can you resist externalizing your pain?
So you've made me think about something, Julia. You know that phrase, hurt people hurt people?
Yeah.
So you're saying hurt people don't have to hurt people. I like that. I like that thought.
Yeah.
But he also reminded me of, I've got a friend who's a psychoanalyst, and he always says the simplest definition of narcissism is people who export their pain.
Yeah.
So it's lots of food for thought.
Yeah. And we all have a bit of narcissism in ourselves. But I think that's probably like a real late stage kind of behavior because it's like it's so hard to hold one's own power, pain. You know, you can narcotize or you can externalize.
Well, maybe that's what somebody like Henry Nouwen was saying when he talks about the wounded healer. To Rekha's comment is that maybe your ability to hold pain is the way to being compassionate. That actually processing your own pain gives you access to collective pain or compassion or whatever.
And tolerance for it, yeah. Yeah. For those that are a bit quieter today, have you got any, has this been a bit cray-cray, the discussion? And have these people made sense? And do you have any questions for the quieter people?
Well, I've been one of the quieter people. I'm just sort of taking it all in. I'm kind of starting my own journey and just sort of evaluating right now from everybody's experiences what I want to do next and how that's going to look, because I feel like everyone shared some really great, insight from their hindsight, and I'm thinking about it differently, and I have a little bit more intention and things to think about as I go on this journey.
Cool.
So thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for joining us. We don't normally get the pleasure of you.
I can't always make it at this time.
It's early, I know. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to make comments? Yeah, Nicola.
Maybe this is also off topic, so just shoot it down. But I'm wondering about the definition of mindfulness that keeps people stuck versus an unflinching, post-verbal staying with what's moving through the moment. That's like phenomenology, real time. Not spiritual bypassing and not band-aiding and not like mindfulness. That brings us into our experience rather than smooths us around the corner.
I love that. Unflinching. What did you call it? Unflinching, phenomenological. What? Staying with.
I don't know. Yeah, a kind of post-verbal staying. Is it not being open to what's moving through, like really close up, close in?
Yeah, the fullness of it. I think there is a problem. Yeah, and it's painful. It's painful all the time. It's completely. It's just. It's like Vipassana meditation is permanently uncomfortable. You're just sweating out your own physical, emotional pain. And I think someone like Christine Caldwell, she wrote an article about bodyfulness, and I think the West's notion of mind is part of the problem of mindfulness, because we think that we have to do it cognitively, but actually you have to do it physically.
So what if we called it something else? I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, but I think that there's maybe a call to be more specific about what we're talking about, that calls us into our life rather than is a form of narcotization.
And I also think there's a call to pitch it at a level of consciousness where whatever the configuration is in terms of body or sensations or mental or cognitive, where most people can get it, where most people can latch onto it. And that's why I think bodyfulness is quite a good notion, because actually it's saying that you can meditate quite physically and forget about the cognitive, because you probably are cognitively quite well developed based on the society we live in. So just, leave that muscle for a while and just concentrate on the other muscle, and most of us will integrate. So I think maybe I'm biased towards that sort of body scan, as you know, Nicola. But I think the body scan is the secret to world peace.
There was a paper I haven't read it. I was just told about last night, which is 10 minutes of not bodyfulness and not mindfulness, but heartfulness, changing the othering between Republicans and Democrats in the States. So reducing the amount of othering that was happening. But there's something really raw that I think can be missed in the desire for self-regulation. And I think when the rawness is missed, then we miss the work.
Yeah.
thought.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I find these, I still like find these conversations so powerful that I almost want to direct them towards something like saving the world or world peace or, you know, solving problems. But yeah, maybe that's not the way to work with this. And I am really grateful at the nature of the community that we have around.